Marc. I'm a sociologist, and it's nice to be here. I'd like to talk about how social media and social networks fit neatly together as a method for better understanding the stream of messages, posts, links, and likes that we now seem to be swimming in. And so in many cases, what I am going to argue for is the need for better tools to visualize and understand social media. And so I'm just going to get that up. There we go. So let's see. There we go. So I'm a sociologist, and I work with a group called the Social Media Research Foundation. We are a group of computer scientists, information scientists, social scientists, practitioners, communications specialists around the world, and our shared vision is that there should be an easier way to do this thing we call network and network analysis. This is what I think a lot of people would agree is the network society, and that means that we're living in a world of connection. But interestingly, most people are not really able to do the 5 basic things that you would have to do to be a citizen of the network society. Maybe you can, but not most people can. And that is get a network, put it somewhere, do something to it, draw a picture of it, and tell a story about it to another human being that makes them think, oh, that was worth my time hearing. These 5 things are very difficult to do if you are not a software developer. And so, quick show of hands. How many software developers are in the room? It's not all of you, though. Okay. So this tool is designed really with the idea that not everybody is a software developer, and yet we would like to make gaining insights into connected structures much easier. And so what we see out there is a kind of swarm, an amorphous kind of phenomena, lots of different maybe tweets or posts or comments, likes and mentions, and trying to understand the shape of this swarm is kind of our goal. And we take a very different view than the typical social media analysis view. It's not about the how much of something, it's the how connected is it. And so the shape of something, the structure of it matters. So it turns out that there are 2 Lego kits. They have the same number of bricks, but that's not enough to describe them because one is the X-Wing and one is the Minecraft box. So the number of something isn't enough. It's the how does it connect to itself question that I think is the more interesting question. But there is this question, which is, what does a hashtag look like? There's the ODSC hashtag or topic. It's being tweeted about. What does that look like if we could draw a picture of it? And of course, then the question should be, why do we need to draw a picture of it? Why can't we just do the big data magic that we can all do and just crunch some numbers? And I'll digress and say, well, there's Anscombe's quartet. Anybody familiar with Anscombe's quartet? Okay, so there's a great set of 4 distributions. Okay, you're disqualified. The beauty of these 4 distributions is that you're supposed to be able to see some insight into these 4 data sets, and it's hard because, at least for me, tabular data doesn't immediately jump out and show me its pattern. And further, the summary statistics for all 4 distributions are identical. And so do the statistics doesn't help. And so can you find what seems to be the outlier or error? How about which of the 4 distributions do you think are most similar to one another? Difficult, difficult, difficult to do. And you're the quantitative folks, right? So how would you like to see your brain do the answers to all those questions for you in less than 300 milliseconds? Because at this point, we're up to almost a minute on this slide, and there's a lot of you out there, so that's a lot of human minutes being burned up trying to get some insight into this data. And here it comes, 300 milliseconds from now, insight. Insight happens quickly. A good third, I think, of the human brain is devoted to the visual cortex. It's a lot of gray matter trying to understand pattern. And so we are trying to figure out how could we describe a collection of connections? How can we draw pictures of those things? Because these collections of connections, networks, are about the most complex data structures that we've got on Earth. I guess networks of networks are the more complex data structure. So the goal, what is a minimally adequate representation of a collection of annotated connections? And a collection of annotated connections might be another very technical term for social media. A collection of annotated connections. So we kind of want to know its shape and its rhythms, and we want to know key moments, we want to know key individuals, we'd like to know kinds of groups, and of course these days, wouldn't we like to know about, invasion and manipulation? And so as a sociologist, I have to say that this phenomena is our core phenomena, and that is the notion that groups matter and crowds matter. And there's almost nothing you can't get done if 750,000 of your closest friends gather. At least it's easy to depose dictators, not easy to implement democracies, maybe. Of course, crowds don't seem to gather in the physical world nearly as often as they used to, and instead they gather online. And the issue we now find is that these online crowds operate in a kind of darkness that leaves them open to all sorts of manipulation. And so the question becomes, how could we go from this tweet stream, which kind of does damage to the data, because it would be like having this politician ask all those people to line up single file. That wouldn't be a crowd anymore. But Twitter delivers crowds that have been turned into spaghetti, because you just get tweet after tweet after tweet. So is there a crowd under that tweet stream? And if so, can data analysis recover it? Can we do social network analysis? Rhetorical question. The answer is yes. And so that is a Twitter crowd talking about a topic, and it's not a topic that they agree about. It's a political topic in the US, and there's actually a good deal of disagreement. And we can tell because there are two relatively large, dense groups with relatively little connection between them. And so if you've heard of filter bubbles or polarization, this is a picture of polarization. These people were talking about the State of the Union several years ago, and they did not agree. And we can tell a little bit about who's who. Well, I put color on them, so that's cheating. But how did I know which group was which? And the answer is, look at the words that describe each group. Those are the words at the top of the box. And where do these words come from? These are the most frequently used hashtags or words used in that cluster. Where did the cluster come from? Well, the cluster is a result of cluster analysis of the graph using an algorithm called Closet-Newman-Moore. Closet-Newman-Moore, basically, if you gave Closet-Newman-Moore a turkey and a cleaver, it would take the drumsticks off first. It looks at your network and tries to figure out where are the weak points of connection to cleave the network, and it did. It found these clusters, and it turns out these clusters have a certain coherence because of a social network phenomena known as homophily, which you may know more familiarly as birds of a feather flock together. We tend towards the people we agree with who are most like us. And so the red people are talking about Tea Party and the GOP, and the blue people are talking about climate change and the sales tax on Wall Street. And you can kind of tell that these are two groups of people with not much affinity for each other. Sir? Good question. Edges in this case are replying or mentioning, and that includes retweeting some other person. So it is the act of communication, and what's missing? It's not who follows who. And why not? Well, Twitter makes that very difficult to get. And it's also very voluminous. If you bump into a 1 million follower person, you're going to have a really big data set. So this is just the set of replies and mentions, retweets, connections between a group of people. And this visualization, we think, actually starts to bring the house lights up on what was an otherwise darkened environment in which you could now ask questions like, well, how many of those are bots? How many of them have creation dates less than a week ago? How many of them have nearly identical patterns of content creation? And so if you imagine a place where people might come to do some form of business, let's say a stock market, and you imagine that place without all of the added features that make those marketplaces work, like accountability, auditability, the fact that there's electricity, the lights are on, the air conditioning is there, all of these things are the enablers of a financial market. What we're seeing in social media marketplaces, the marketplace of ideas, is a place without yet the auditability and the accountability. There's no air conditioning, there's no lights, and a lot of bad things can happen as a result. So it has been said that network visualization is always bad because it never gets better than this. And it's true. This is not a particularly useful form of information visualization. But using the talents of a number of people, in particular, I'll point to the work of Dr. Cody Dunn, now at Northeastern University in Massachusetts, who developed this group-in-a-box layout for multifaceted analysis of communities. Essentially, the clustering algorithm knows who's in what cluster, and we give each chunk its own piece of real estate, and then tessellate those regions, and then bring in the cross-region connections. The result, I hope you would agree, and we have some math to prove it, is that this is almost incomprehensible, and this starts to show some real structure. And so our call to action here is don't give up on the directed graph. The node link diagram may have flaws, but it can be improved. And so and we're not arguing at all that this is the last stop on the way, but that there's a lot of room for improvement. And in fact, the metaphor we'd like to bring is the notion of an autofocus camera, a camera that does white balance and color adjustment for you. And what we'd like to do is be able to bring those images of networks into focus for you as easily as possible, hopefully with a single button press. So why networks? Because networks are the language of organizations and of societies, and that even if you're not a network theorist, probably spending a few seconds looking at this, admittedly it's not data, it's a cartoon, but I worked for at least one of these companies. Well, only one of these companies. And I'm pretty sure it's very accurate. I was at Microsoft Research for 10 years. We didn't all get along, right? It didn't always, it wasn't always kumbaya. But with just some dots and lines, you can really convey what might otherwise be ineffable, a kind of feeling, a culture, a way we do things around here that actually can be quantified and visualized. The challenge then is how do we make these pictures as easily as possible? And our metaphor again is that there is this technology that emerged about 100 years ago, 110 years ago now, before which being a photographer was a very difficult thing. After which about 1.5 trillion chemical photographs were taken. Yeah. Until about 2008, when Kodak went out of business, essentially, as a commercial consumer-grade film producer. I mean, they make X-ray film now, right? But they don't really make film, and I don't know. I haven't seen film in years. So what we might want to do is upgrade to like the point-and-shoot disposable camera, or maybe we could go all the way to digital, or recognize that this thing is also obsolete, right? Nobody's ever going to spend money for one of these things again when you have one of these things. And so what we would like to be is this on your PC, not your phone yet. And what it does is takes pictures of groups, but not physical groups. It takes pictures of virtual groups, and it looks like that. And so it just plugs into Excel, and it makes it so that you can see patterns of connection as easily as you could see a pie chart. Because a network really just needs a spreadsheet with 2 columns that say who did what with whom. That's 3 columns. But really, you just need who and who else. The 3rd column is nice because then you know what kind of relationship. So this is what it looks like in the UI. You get a menu. It's got a drop down. If you say, hey, I'd like a bunch of Twitter data or Facebook data or YouTube data, you just get a dialog box. It will talk to the API for you. And in the end, it generates something that looks like this. And so it's a big old spreadsheet with lots and lots of tabs. And each tab is a dimension of your network and all of the processed metadata and analysis about it. And over in pane number 2, you're going to get the overview or visualization of your graph. And you can interact with it there. And as I'll show you in a few seconds, this can also then generate a variety of data-driven artifacts for presentation. Like we can send it to the web. We can send it to a slide deck. We can send it to an email. We can send it to other web portals where you can visualize this stuff. So for example, let's go find a browser. And we can take a look at, for example, here, this is the Node Excel Graph Gallery. So this is the publish it to the web. And each of these is a little thumbnail, which is a representation of a network, and our users upload them from a variety of sources. Often it's Twitter, but it can be other things. And here is the word ODSC being mapped. And here today is the map of ODSC. It's a bunch of connections, a bunch of people, and they formed some clusters, and they actually formed some shapes. It's not just the number of people, it's the how they connected to each other. And what is that shape? It's the shape that you might think of as a wagon wheel or a hub and spoke. There's a dot in the center of the 3 largest clusters, or about the 4 or 5 largest clusters. And those people are tweeting, and they're being retweeted. They're being mentioned and replied. But the people who mention, reply, and retweet these people are not talking to each other. They have formed an audience, not a community. And who are these people? Well, you can zoom, but we can also help you just by scrolling. Those are the 10 people, and these are the 10 hashtags. And we can show them to you in a little bit prettier format. So there are 10 of the most influential people talking about ODSC. You may be on this list. Anybody on this list? And the question then, I think, could be asked, why are these people on this list? And I'll note that they are ranked by betweenness centrality. And betweenness centrality is a network property of middleness. How much in the middle of this graph are you? How much essentially are you the hub of that hub and spoke pattern? And so an interesting attribute of this is that if you will go down the list of the follower accounts along there, you'll note that they're not in follower account order. So we're not saying that the most influential people talking about ODSC are the people with the most followers. And you could, I just don't agree with you. It's not the people with the most tweets or the most retweets. It's, for at least this sociologist, it's the people in the middle of things. And it turns out that that seems to be a really good proxy for what other people might consider to be social importance. It's not necessarily the people with the most followers, and it's not always even the people who are at the event. Kirk D. Bourne, he talked about ODSC a lot. But I tweeted at him, and he's not coming, so he's in Germany right now. But he talked about the event, and he's a very, very prominent Twitter user. Kirk is the mayor of big data. And has anybody heard of Kirk? You ever seen Kirk's tweets? If you dial up big data on any given day, you're going to find that Kirk is pretty much the dominant person being retweeted about it. It's not that he tweets a lot. It's that when he tweets, people listen. And so there are these thought leaders in almost every topic and community. We can find these thought leaders not because of what they say or how often they say it, but by how other people react to them, essentially doing the trick that Google did to the web. Google understood that the page that was most important for the word carburetor might not have the word carburetor in it. And that was quite a trick. Alta Vista counted the carburetors, right? Didn't work out for Alta Vista. But Google saw that the graph, the network, was really where all the action was, and that gave them enormous power. So if we can deliver networks in Excel, if we can make it so that it's really just a bunch of click boxes and go, sort of the way that my digital camera now says, look, I take better pictures than you, why don't you let me take over? And so just a series of worksheets and workbooks let you then see the many facets and dimensions of a collection of connections, because it's not just one thing. It had dimensions over time, it had dimensions of connectivity, it had words associated with it, and we might want to do some sentiment analysis. We might want to count the words and figure out how many people said angry, violent words versus how many people said, you know, peaceful words. And you might want to understand which cluster had the most angry, violent people in it. And so here, another slice of ODSC over 22 days, a month of ODSC, and associated with this would be, what are the other hashtags? What words, what are we talking about? You know, what do we talk about when we talk about ODSC? And we're talking about AI and data science and machine learning and deep learning and San Francisco, big data and data scientists and Jamal Khashoggi. Yeah. And so these are topics that mattered to this community. This is the a little bit more focused ODSC West hashtag, you know, a little bit more specific to us. And it's a different top 10 list. It's slightly different top people, some overlap. But again, the structure of our social media collectivity has been essentially broadcast. Some of us are tweeting up a storm. The rest of us are retweeting them, and very little of this could be said to be, quote, community, if community was actual interaction and multiplex connections, not just one person speaks and we all repeat them, but rather lots of people talk to lots of people, many to many, rather than one to many. And so getting a feel for this, and this is the same kind of thing, but now for the word data science, data, and the hashtag data science, gives you a sense of, and there he is, there's Mike Quindozzi and Kirk Deborn, the mayors of data science, at least when Twitter's being asked. And these are and then Ronald Van Loon, these people are really tearing up the tweet stream, not just in terms of volume of tweets, but in terms of how other people react to their tweets, putting them in the middle of these structures. So, all right, and then this is deep learning. So you can do this for pretty much any topic and find out that Mike Quindozzi and Kirk Deborn are almost always going to be in the top 10 lists for almost all of these very data science-y topics, at least right now. And the question could be asked, well, why? And the answer is they were paid to. I mean, it's their jobs to be thought leaders. They work for people like Booz Allen Hamilton and PricewaterhouseCoopers, and their job is to be the public face of thought leadership. A feature we're working on is to actually pivot all of this into sort of the trees, the thread structure, and you can see that in many cases tweet streams are shallow. They're not deep, which is to say that you don't end up in long chains of turn and reply of conversation. You basically get call and response. I tweet, you say retweet, you know, goes up and back, but the chains are not very deep. So our aspiration is to essentially put these kinds of tools into the hands of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. And if that happens, then one research output is this. If you go to scholar.google and you type in Node Excel, that's one of the ways that we're keeping score. That's our KPI. And so far, we're somewhere around 6,000 reported results with Google Scholar, which is a little liberal when it comes to defining what an academic paper is. But let's just say we'll take 50% of that. We're very interested in enabling the kinds of publications that probably weren't going to get done otherwise, because the people doing them are not going to master R and Python in time. However, if you are the master of R and Python, you may still find some utility in the tool in that we are a data pipeline for taking your data and converting it into a format that may be storytellable, trying to convey what do you say about a network when you're telling somebody about it. And in essence, you end up talking about who are the key people, what are the groups, and what is the overall morphology or shape of the crowd. And to that end, we put up all these examples so you can look at them and you can go, well, they're not all the same. Does that mean that there is a kind of topology of social structures in social media? And thankfully, the universe may be varied, but it is structured. There's a lot of self-similarity here. And we'll see in a couple of steps that as people are passing things around to one another and leaving footprints behind, all of the different kinds of connections they make are going to leave certain kinds of patterns. So it doesn't really matter which of the platforms you're using, you're making a network. What matters is that the different platforms make different shaped networks. And that's how we might be able to compare them. We can start thinking about the ways in which you can actually connect from one person to another. Is it a follow? Is it a friend? Is it a reply? Is it a mention? Is it I edited the same thing you edited? Because all day, every day, all we do as we swipe and tap is make connections to other people. And so, not all of those connections are reciprocated. Not all of them are mutual. Some of them are imbalanced. It's said that, some of these can't be mutual. It's like I give you rides to the airport, but for some reason the people I give rides to the airport never give me a ride to the airport. I lend money to certain people, but the people I lend money to never seem to lend me money. So there are some relationships that are imbalanced, and yet there are other relationships that are supposed to be mutual, like marriage, right? If you find that you're married to somebody who's not married to you, we recommend counseling, but that's the kind of relationships sometimes come with an arrow and sometimes they come with two arrows, and so we are interested in helping people see the network in their data and move from network data to insight into network as fast as possible. Because it seems that insights into networks really matter right now, because the networks that we live in seem to have all sorts of things in them with us that we weren't aware of. The fact that bots are telling us that the local election polling place is closed, or that it moved, or the hours are different. It would be interesting to understand, where does information come from in order to discover its provenance. It may not be possible to tell the difference between truth and falsity anymore, but it might be possible to figure out, where did this information come from? And so when we look at all those patterns, it turns out that we found 6 basic shapes. And these 6 basic shapes show up in the data. And if you go to Graph Gallery, maybe you're on Wi-Fi or on your phone, you can go to Node Excel Graph Gallery. You'll see these shapes over and over and over again. And of course, the question then is that it? Can there not be a 7th shape? I bet there can be a 7th shape. We would just like evidence. We just want the data. When we documented these shapes with Pew, we provided 10 examples of each of the shapes. We said, we can find you a wagon wheel shape. In fact, we can find you 10 of these. And we provided lots of sample examples of these different morphologies, because it was fairly easy to find this shape, for example. There's always going to be the wagon wheel wherever there is celebrity or there is sort of a thought leader relationship. And when we see those shapes, what we should be thinking is audience. That's not community, that's audience. That is celebrity, perhaps, but it's a certain kind of shape. It's very prominent, but what it really is talking about is a certain kind of social process of call and response, not conversation. Then, of course, there are the people who are the connectors. They're rare. Especially if we're talking about political polarization. These may be the most important people on Earth, the only people who actually connect across the aisle. And yet network analysis also lets us really understand the importance of these people. These are the people who have no connections at all, isolates. And it turns out that in social media, having a lot of isolates means you're a brand, because lots of people mention you but don't talk to other people about you. So the difference in our approach that we're trying to justify here is start with connection, don't start with content. Content matters. We're going to get there. But if you start with connection and cluster on connection, then do content analysis, you're dealing with buckets, bags of words, rather than bag of words. The hashtag ODSC is too varied to be treated as a single bag of words. But if we look again, you'll see that it was basically a dozen separate neighborhoods. Each of those bags, plural, of words can be analyzed with much more precision. You really get a sense of what made those people talk about that versus this. These groups of people are different because they link to these things differently. They talk about these things differently. So connection, then cluster, then content. So what we want to know, I think, is who are the leaders? What are they talking about? And who should we engage? And whether or not certain information is more trustworthy and reliable than others. We may really want to understand, says who? because it turns out that an enormous amount of what is flowing through that network right now is not as reliable as we would like it to be, I think. So our workflow is just to take you through this as quickly as possible. We're going to get you some data, put it somewhere, analyze it, visualize it, and publish it. We're going to provide you with spigots or data providers from a range of endpoints. And we're going to try to make data management as easy as possible for people who really don't know how to spell SQL by putting it all in a bucket. And that bucket is a spreadsheet. And, you know, I've seen a lot of people use Excel as a word processor. You might as well use it as a database, too. And so it's a place where a lot of our users can handle the direct manipulation of data. They don't have to imagine rows and columns somewhere in their mind. They just find the row and the column, and they click, and they edit that cell. So, you know, there are two types of humans on Earth, those who can instantiate data structures in their minds, and the rest of us. You know, more than 3 categories is hard for most people. So then we're going to do some of the basic analysis. We're going to try to do the basics of network theory for you. And it turns out that 8 or 10 or 15 of those metrics are really going to get 80% of the use case. There are many, many, many very esoteric kinds of network metrics and methodologies. What we're trying to do is make the 80% case as easy to do as possible. And so if you do find metrics that we are missing that you feel are very critical, we're happy to add things over time. But it's been reasonably stable over the last 3 to 5 years, not a lot of change. So these are sort of the core metrics of network analysis. And then, of course, the idea is to draw the picture, because the pictures bring intuitions. And they bring intuitions from the non-numerate, or the, you know, functionally innumerate, which is to say humanity. And so you can actually share these pictures with a little training, because a lot of times people look at these things and they say, I saw this when I was driving my car fast through a bug swarm. I saw this stuff on my windshield. It's that, right? And it's true. There is a level of visual literacy that is our challenge. But, you know, time series charts were not immutable facts of reality. At one point in, what, the 1870s or 1880s, the time series chart was introduced, and we all learned what that jagged line meant. It's not natural. This may not be natural, but it is comprehensible, and I believe the challenge of getting over the visual literacy hurdle is doable. Particularly if we can cut to the chase and tell you, what am I looking at and why? And the answer is, what do you do when you use Google Maps? I like to think there are 3 big functions that I use Google Maps for routinely. The number one is, where am I? Number 2, where do I want to go? Number 3, how do I get there? Those are my top 3 applications for Google Maps. Why can't we do that for the sociological landscape that we live on? Which may be more important than the geographical landscape, unless you're on the wrong side of a bridge. I understand that can be critical, but what if you're on the wrong side of a bridge right now, but sociologically speaking, not geographically speaking? Which is to say, there's somebody you should connect to, you're not connected to, and you don't know how to get there. And I appreciate that. Isn't this what LinkedIn was supposed to do for us? I understand, but it didn't. And when they drew these maps for us, there was this thing called InMap. 4 or 5 years ago, they took it away. And I live not far from Mountain View, and so I have a couple of contacts at LinkedIn. I had, many years ago, a lunch there, and beautiful cafeteria, great asparagus. And you know, at some point I said, you know, you're the only platform out there with an API that doesn't actually emit the who does what with whom thing, the edge, the connection. Don't you know how valuable the network is, was my question. And the answer was, we do know how valuable the network is. That's why you can't have it. And so if that's the case, then why are we banking our network in a bank that doesn't allow withdrawals? So a question might be asked, are platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn data banks? Or are they data casinos? Which is to say, when I go to a bank, I give you my principal, and I earn interest, and at any time I may withdraw principal and interest, and I can take it somewhere else. I go to Facebook and I put my digital artifacts there, literally to gain interest because I want you to like it. And then I can get my photo out, yes, because Mr. Zuckerberg does tell us you can download all your data, absolutely. But you can't get any of the interest. Right? You don't get your comments, you don't get your likes, you don't get your reactions, you don't get the connections among your friends. None of that is yours. And so why did you bank your network in something that's not a bank? I ask myself this question too, right? I mean, we were all led to do this. But if we start to think of them as banks, then we will also bring ideas of audit and accountability, and also of the idea of having accounting software on our side that is an image of what is in their side. In other words, two data sets. You might have your own accounting system. You wouldn't necessarily just believe the bank. And so we are in a state where we are banking basically all of the really interesting parts of our lives with these platforms, and they turn out not to be banks. Now, if we tell them we want them to be banks, maybe we can make them become banks. Banks get regulated, they get audited, they have accounting systems. Maybe we can say, hey, this is not data casino. I am not here to win the advertising lottery. I'm here to deposit the principal of my information and try to get some interest. So what can we learn? We can learn a lot about the shape of these networks. We can find out something about the shape of the virtual crowd. And given how important that virtual crowd is to our daily lives these days, it seems odd that we are okay without photographs. If somebody on the news says, thousands gathered in front of the Capitol today, you might think they're going to show a picture of that crowd. And you're going to look at that crowd, and you're all amateur sociologists. You will learn something about the nature of that happy crowd, angry crowd, divided crowd, panicked crowd. What kind of crowd? But people say this all the time now. Things went viral on social media, essentially saying a crowd emerged around that topic. And yet we don't have pictures of those crowds. And that seems to me to be a problem, that we need to figure out which kind of crowd was it. Bring me a picture. And so let's see. Yeah, we're I think coming close to our time. 37 minutes. We got a little time. Okay, very good. So looking at these patterns, you can see that they're not all alike. This is what division looks like. These are two groups of people talking about tax policy. Very few of them talk to the other group of people. And so it turns out that social media is not the place where we go to meet with a diverse group of people and discuss a variety of concepts. It's where we go to find people just like us, where we will then complain about them. Now and the good news is that's not the only pattern. Is it like, oh, humans, they're all division all the time? No, this is the hashtag community manager chat. There are no outsiders. There is no division. You can almost hear them singing Kumbaya. It's a professional group. They're kind of friendly with each other. This is what community looks like. Lots of people cross-connected with lots of people. It's not celebrity, it's community. And yet this is what brand looks like. Almost nobody's connected to anybody. This is back when there was a thing called Illumia. And they're saying things like, I'm thinking about getting Illumia, I got Illumia, I regret having gotten Illumia. And more than 53% of the population has zero connections to other people in the graph. And so that's brandness. And it's not a bad thing. If you want to be a brand, you want this to happen. And so the fraction of isolates is actually an interesting metric in capturing the social dynamics of your space, whatever that feed might be. And notice, if you can think back, and we can toggle back, how many isolates were in the ODSC graph. Can you remember how many of them were zero connection people? We'll go back in a few seconds, we'll look at it. But think about it. If there were a lot of them, then this would be something that had a public outside of the event. And if there are very few of them, then it's an in-group. Right? So that would be a kind of sociological distinction we can make about our organization just by looking at the graphs that it generates. So we'll do it. We'll go check out what does it look like when we look at ODSC. And the answer up here was, there we go. Okay, so there's ODSC. Group 4 is the isolate cluster. The cluster with people with no connections to anybody else. And so that means that the fourth largest part of our population are people who are probably not retweeting or replying to tweets that are already out here, because then they would have a line. So they're out there and they're just saying the word ODSC. And that means that they are able to nominate the word all by themselves. And that's a meaningful thing. It means you have brand. There is some awareness in the world of ODSC as a thing. It can be nominated all by itself. So if we look through this, the goal is to quickly give you what I like to think of as the kind of espresso shot of a stream of social media. You know, there is now so much social media that we are now in a situation where machines have enabled humans to create more content than humans can consume. And somewhere in those unobserved spaces, apparently a lot of people get up to no good. There's a lot of sort of cultural foment that leads to potentially dangerous things. And so it would be interesting to be able to see these spaces, to visualize them. And so perhaps by getting to draw pictures of them, we would actually be able to tell when are things that are not normal happening here. When is it possible to identify some incursion or manipulation? And so you might want to be able to see the top people, and if you know them, you might even want to try to engage them. And we do have a feature here that does content analysis of each person's content, and we call this the smart tweet. And a smart tweet basically is a TF over IDF calculation for every term that each person uses. So that's salience. It's basically asking the question, which words do you use more than the rest of the community uses them? And those become your magic words, and at which point we suggest that if you're going to talk to Kirk D. Bourne, almost certainly you would be talking about machine learning, and to my great satisfaction, he talks about Node Excel. And so if you talk to him about that, that would be good. But each of these people has a profile, and if we were to just click on them, we're able to tell what would we want to talk to them about. And in Brown, we would talk to him about data science and Kirk. And then, of course, the goal would be to get them to retweet me and include my hashtag and URL, which is the point of all tweeting, right? Isn't it? That if only you would retweet me and get my URL and hashtag in front of some other human being, that would be great. So one of the ways that we can make this problem go away is that if the machines have made it so that humans can create more content than humans can consume, the machines have gotten us into this problem, therefore the machines will have to get us out of that problem. And what solution could they offer? They can read the content for us, and then they can concentrate it into an espresso shot. Instead of asking you to evaluate ODSC by reading 1,000 Twitter users' content and about 4,000 tweets, which is a day's work, right? And at the end of that long scroll, you're going to have a pain in your thumb, and the question will be asked, what do you know now that you did not know before? Are you a machine? Can you remember who tweeted the most, who's the most central, what hashtags are being used most frequently? No, you have an impression, and an expensive impression. And so what we would like to do is pull for you the espresso shot of, and not just Twitter, any collection of annotated connections, which pretty much defines what you and I think, swim in all day, whether it's email or text messages or posts or comments, it's collections of annotated connections. What do you want to know about them? You might want to know who are the key people. What are they tweeting about? Well, those are the URLs most frequently used across the whole graph and then by each of the buckets, each of these clusters. And what's particularly interesting is when you do that for hashtags. And so those are the top hashtags, but notice how the top hashtags and each subgroup's hashtags are not necessarily aligned. At which point we can come up with a content vector, and we can also find the difference between those vectors and the similarity score between those vectors, and we can tell you just how much these two groups are the same. And so when we did this research with Pew wanted to know how much of a filter bubble really exists between left and right-leaning groups in social media talking about US politics. And so we went and collected all the tweets related to a tax policy discussion back then. It was called My2K. It was going to be a change in the tax policy that was going to increase all of our taxes by $2,000. And it seems so quaint now. But it was a big uproar. And so we counted all the URLs in the red group and all the URLs in the blue group, and we wanted to figure out what was the shared or overlap percentage, and it was really easy to calculate because it was 0. It was 0. And so people do live in filter bubbles, and if you're going to try to consume other filter bubbles, now you're really multiplying your information consumption burden. And I don't know about you, but who wants more email? Anything more to read at all? Anything to click on, to look, to swipe? I'm done. I'm at my top limit. I have no more to give. And so can't we use each of those swipes and taps more efficiently? Can't we let the machines do some work for us? Tell me what's interesting in my tweet stream. I'm going to consume the distilled version, and maybe that distilled version will actually let me know when there are incursions, manipulations, distortions, disinformation, misinformation, and so on, because it turns out that that's becoming an issue, right? Without the tools to visualize what's going on, we're kind of stuck in a situation where we're not able to really manage the nature of our information systems, because it turns out computer scientists have built us information systems. That is not the same thing as high-quality information systems. And this is a really tricky problem, because do you really want a truth-only internet? We know that we're going to disagree about truth, but let's just work with it for a moment. You send an email, it contains the sentence, Santa Claus is coming to town. The internet rejects it. Santa Claus does not exist, it says. We don't really want an information system with opinions, but the problem is they're not high-quality information systems as a result. And we're in this really tricky morass culturally of what is now being called tribal epistemology, which is to say things are true to certain groups of people. There are no truths, there is no fact, there is just tribal epistemology. And so even when you try to explain to people when they've made an error, that an error was made, it turns out trying to convince somebody that they made an error just makes them believe what they believe more. And so we are now faced with sort of this weaponized social media. And what are we going to do about it? Well, you know, apparently we have some top leadership leading the way, exploring tribal epistemology. But I would like to say that as technologists, maybe you all have a role to play in thinking about what is the proper design of these systems. You guys build them. What should they have in them? And I would argue that we are in a state that's not unlike automobiles in the teens and 20s, you know, early on. Actually, the 30s and the 40s. For that matter, the 50s and the 60s. What happened in the late 60s, early 70s to automobiles that made them dramatically safer? Seatbelts. Made out of some kind of cloth, right? Seatbelts, complex technology, very, very complex, saves lives though. How many years did it take between automobile is a common technology to seatbelts are a requirement, let alone you have to use them, but automobile manufacturers used to charge you more for them? Wasn't a requirement. Roll bars, crash bars, the bumpers. How long did it take for all those technologies to become mitigating safety technologies for automobile? And the answer is sadly 50 years or more. If you look at this room, if you look in the ceiling, I think you're going to probably see some sprinkler heads, certainly some fire detection, and luckily there's the Wi-Fi, that's good. How long did it take before buildings had to have sprinklers? Turns out sprinklers were invented in 1837 at a textile mill in Scotland. Because textile mills, what do they do a lot? Explode in fire. And so they thought maybe it would be a good idea to put water in pipes up at the top. How long did it take? So here we are on the internet, the information superhighway. Where is my bumper? Where's my airbag? Where's my safety belt? And maybe the issue is, where's my brake? Every button I see in social media amplifies and accelerates information. Accelerator pedal. You may like it, you can share it, you can forward it, you can favorite it, you can amplify it. Where's the brake? And I would argue we don't have one. and that we could have one. We could have a tool that addresses the fact that not everybody is doing this equally, that we could detect and maybe deflect, even if it is morally ambiguous if we are going to engage in that last one, deter. I'm not ready to work on deter, but I'm real into working on that first one. Radar for social media. Any of you interested in building radar for social media? Seems like it could be useful. Remember what one technology won the Battle of Britain? Radar won the Battle of Britain. And, you know, civility comes with mutual accountability. This is the work of Jane Jacobs, a sociologist who studied what makes a neighborhood, and she said it's eyes on the street, which is to say enough of your neighbors noticing that you're not around and that somebody's in your house, and that's weird. In other words, a sense of mutual interlocking moral accountability. And so we don't want this. We don't want to make it illegal to post anything you want on the internet. I understand that. But we really don't want to leave the castle gates wide open. And maybe what we really need is a better architecture. What if we added a break? What if various groups of people said, this is not acceptable information and fewer people should see it? What would that look like? I would argue it means simply, for just Twitter, it just means making you two kinds of follow buttons. The I'm just listening and I am letting you make decisions for me button. And this button would let me nominate, let's say, the New York Times or some other organization to kind of filter my feed for me so that I might not see some things. Now, admittedly, we have a whole user experience where it's going to say this tweet not displayed because someone applied a tag to it. You could click on that and see it and go, oh, you're right, I don't want to see that. Or, you know, why is Trans Energy Canada telling me that Greenpeace is wrong? That seems wrong. I'm going to revoke Trans Energy Canada's right to govern me. There they are, Trans Canada. So, you know, it seems to me that what we are looking for are safety belts and a bumper system and maybe airbags. We need the mitigating technology to make these platforms safe, not to just throw them all away. So with that, I'd love to hear any questions, queries, comments, concerns, thoughts, issues. And if there are none, I'll just say I thank you so much for staying with me all this time. Thank you. Oh, yeah, okay, that was good, but there's a question. So let's do that first. Yeah, ma'am, hello.
You said it's for the audience, not for the community. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
So we're looking here at an audience in that in group one, we have a single account. I believe it's the ODSC account. It is. It's the most central account. And it sits in the middle, and it has this circle of people around it, all of whom have retweeted or mentioned that account. We call that audience because those people are not actually talking to each other. They are merely hearing this central celebrity account, a thought leader account. And they're giving that account retweet. They're replying to it maybe, but in many cases, they are not talking to each other. And so community, from a sociological perspective, you might define as some level of multiplexity, many to many rather than one to many. And so in that pattern, I see a one to many pattern and not a many to many pattern. And so I would argue that that means it's broadcaster audience and not community. And that there are some places, not in this graph, but there are some places in social media where there is many to many going on, and that would be an indication of community, and it turns out to be relatively rare. I don't know if you remember, but social media used to have a different name, and it was online community, until we realized this doesn't resemble any community I'm a part of. And so calling it community when it's not, I think, was a mistake, in the same way that calling the people you connected to with on Facebook friends was a mistake. I think LinkedIn did us a better favor by calling them contacts. But, you know, when you load up the word friend or community and sort of march your business model underneath it, you change the meaning of friend. And so here, what we're seeing is that's what celebrity or prominence looks like. It's the hub and spoke pattern, but that's not the shape of a community. And it's not that the internet has zero community. It does. It's just relatively rare and precious when you find it. Yeah, I would argue that that one is community. Let's go back and take a look at it. Let's see, I think those are way down here. And yes, here, that one. So this one was divided. Now, you could argue this is community too, it's just two communities. And you know, there's a certain legitimacy to that point, that the blue community and the red community are essentially, you know, communities within themselves, but the difference between this, which we call polarized, and this, which we call community or in-group, is that there isn't a second group here. It's not like the community managers are like, well, we're the red community managers and those are the blue community managers. We don't like them. And we won't even talk to them. Everybody is pretty much connected to everybody here. And that's what I would argue is the distinction between a polarized pair of communities and a single community. And compare that with the amount of connection there. Almost no connection. And so this becomes brand rather than community or polarized. It's a different kind of a crowd. And if you go to, you go to the airport, you go to a train station, you kind of see this pattern. None of those people are there to interact with each other. They're just passing through. Versus you go to an auditorium, you may not be friends with those people, but you are going to sit next to them for an hour and a half. Versus you go to a dinner table, and you're definitely having a very different interaction, but the group size is now dropped. It's hard to get more than 10 or 12 people around a table. So these different shapes that happen in the physical world, that, when you see a group of people, you can kind of see, oh, it's that kind of group of people. That's happening in social media, but without the tools to see it, we can't get these intuitions. We won't know about the variety of shapes on these platforms. All right, thank you. All right, let's do the clapping part now. That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the time. There are some cards with information about this, and there's a yellow sheet of paper here. If an email address finds its way to that piece of paper, it will receive a PDF of the book about NodeXL. So you get a PDF. So cards and a piece of paper for email collection. Thank you very much.